G'day guys, I just wrapped up a spec ad for Skǒda using just my personal car. I went pretty hard with the sound effects for that one and have had a lot of questions around the process. So I thought I would just do a video dedicated entirely to sound effects. So first, let's check out the finished product. Now, before I get into the breakdown, I wanted to quickly run you guys through what's going on with Cinematic Social. Now, for those that don't know, I have just started my own filmmaking course, which will be available very, very soon. So Volume 1 is the first to be releasing its filmmaking foundation. So basically everything in my filmmaking process from start to finish. Now, Volume 1 is going to be releasing very, very soon. So head over to my website and sign up to get all of the details in your inbox. Right, so let's start breaking this down. So first of all, let's talk about where I get my sound effects from. So I get it from two places, one from lens distortions and two from ocular sounds. Now, lens distortions is really good because they also have music as well. And it is honestly some of the best music I've ever used. I've used Music Bed, I've used Artlist, I've used Epidemic Sound, and Lens Distortions is by far and above some of the best music that I've ever used. So let's jump in and check it out. So if you open up the Lens Distortions site here, you will see that you have a few tabs here. Now, they also have a lot of color and VFX things as well. So like overlays as well as LUTs, color grading, things like that. But I mainly operate in the music and sound effects. So let's jump into music. Now, this particular album here, Factor 1, this has been one of the most used albums for me as of late. I have gotten so much use out of these albums recently, and it has given me a lot of inspiration on some of the edits that I want to make. Now, some of these are actually sound design tracks, which is one of the things I love the most about Lens Distortions is they have the ability to have just standard music tracks, but a lot of what they create is actually sound design tracks as well. So music like ambient music combined with sound designed tracks. So multiple layers of sound effects rather than just, single sound effects. They have multiple layers of them that is completely designed for basically to be able to just drop in and almost create a video straight from that without having to add more layers. So Factor 1 is a really great album. I would honestly just jump in there and just download every single one of them and then start creating. It is a sick album. Another couple of albums that I also really love from Lens Distortions, this Gravity one has been really good for a few of those shorter storytelling pieces. Now, these aren't sound design tracks. These are just simple, just sort of undertone music. Really great for like kind of short mini doc series. And then also this Decades album 2 is really good. Now, I think this one is more designed at kind of like a travel filmmaker type edit. These are beautiful. And then also this Form and Function album. This is another one that has a bunch of really great sort of semi-sound design ones in here. Another really great album to jump onto. Now, if we head over to the sound effects tab in Lens Distortions, these albums here are basically all just sound design tracks. So all of these are, they can be between sort of like, 10 to 30 to 45 seconds worth of sound design tracks. So they have a little bit of ambient sound in there, but mainly it's designed to be a series of sound effects, layers and things like that to, as I said before, basically just give you the entire foundations of a video and you can edit from that. Now, I've actually used this in the past where rather than starting with my edit and then applying my sound effects later, I've actually started with some of these tracks and then edited my videos to these tracks because it gives you a good amount of breathing room in between each of the sound effects and allows, some kind of like, as I said, breathing room and little spaces in there to let your edits breathe a little bit more. So this is a really great start if you're looking to practice kind of implementing some more sound effects in some of your videos. I would definitely check out some of Lens Distortion's sound design tracks. So this Whiplash album is really good. A lot of this is just, as you can kind of suggest from the banner image here, basically a lot of it is kind of like cars, you know, mechanics, whooshes, things like that to kind of, you know, if you're doing a lot of automotive work, this is really good for that. And I actually did use one of these tracks as a kind of baseline for my edit that I'm about to run you guys through, but then also pulled out a bunch of sections from these sound effects that I use just as single sound effects. So, you know, when you go through some of these tracks, you'll notice that there's like these little peaks and troughs. So a lot of these are just single sound effects that you can actually just cut straight out of these sound design tracks and use as individual effects if you want to. So there's heaps of really good albums in lens distortions here. My probably 3 most used ones as of late have been Whiplash, Torque, and Fast Cuts. Now, Whiplash and Torque are very kind of like automotive focused, so lots of whooshes and things like that. But this Fast Cuts one is really good for, you know, as it might suggest, fast cutting. So if you want to have, you know, those little pulses in your video, those little fast moments, this is great for that, to give something to cut to. Right, now moving on over to Ocular. One of my favorite things that these guys do really well is mechanics. So they have this album here, Cinematic Mechanics, that has a lot of, you know, like ratchets and gear sounds and clicking and things like that, that goes really well as, you know, transitions and whips and things like that in videos that can kind of apply to anything really. It doesn't need to be, you know, so specific to cars and gears and bikes and things like that. You can really use this to go with a lot of things. So I love this album, and this Cinematic Cars album is really good. I pull a lot of my automotive sounds from this one, but honestly, I would just recommend jumping straight into the Ultimate Sound Effects bundle. It really, like, there's so much value in there. Even if there's a lot of stuff that you may not think you'll ever use, you'd be surprised if you go through some of the things in there and listen to some of them. There's actually some really good stuff in there. So I would just recommend jumping straight into the Ultimate Sound Effects bundle. I do actually have a code, so Elliot20, you guys can jump in and use that code for 20% off store-wide. You know, grab whatever you want. Another good recommendation is the Cinematic Elements collection. It has fire, water, stone, cars, gym, and mechanics. Another really good one to pick up. But Ocular, I definitely recommend for all sorts of things mechanics. Jump onto their website. There is so much stuff on there. I really have been using it a lot lately. So I think one of the things when it comes to creating edits like this is understanding what kind of edit you're going to do. So for this one, before I even started, I knew it was going to be a real sound effects heavy edit. So I knew that that was going to take precedence over any kind of voiceover or any music that I want to throw in. So it was going to be primarily sound effects. So when you're approaching an edit like this, I think make that decision first. Do you want it to be a really cool music track that has sound effects to kind of elevate it? Or do you want it to be mainly about the sound effects? Make that decision before you go into it. So knowing that, I went in knowing it was going to be fully sound effects. So the packs that I used from Lens Distortions were Factor 1, Slices, Torque, and Whiplash. And from Ocular, I used Cinematic Mechanics and Cinematic Cars. Now, when we jump into the timeline here, you can see that I've broken things down by layers. So when I edit these videos, I usually like to go through and just do pass after pass after pass, and then just keep on adding in different sound effects, but focusing on one layer at a time. So the first layer that I'll start with is the track. If I have a track, that's what I'll be using. And you can see in this one, I've only got, this is the only element of track here. And this was actually just a small piece of inspiration that I took when I used this track. Now, listening to this, you can hear that kind of like, that like wub sound effect as it goes down after the hit. That was actually one of the big pieces of inspiration, because I knew I wanted to have a quick start, but then have like a long few second shot that just holds. You can see I've got that one shot just of the headlights there that just holds. Now there's a really slow rotate on there, and then there's also a riser that comes back in to kick off the action. So what I'm going to do is run you guys through layer by layer what I did here. So let's start with layer 1. Now you can see that this is very minimal. I've only just got the beginnings of the track here. Now there's 2 hits there. So the first hit, which is just after this pulse at the start. So it's a hit, like a riser into a hit, and then a very long drop off with that, you know, that wub that I was talking about. Back into another hit. So it's this pause, this like long pausing shot, and then back into the action again. So this is where I started. This was my starting point. Now, if we move into level 2, what I've done here is just gone through and added in all of the whooshes. So at any time there's a, you know, something moving through the frame, like, you know, obviously there's gonna be a lot of that being that this is a car spec ad. I've basically just gone through, and anytime there's lots of fast movement in the frame, I've added in a whoosh. So let's run through this. So as you can see there, I've basically just got the whooshes in there now. So adding in those whooshes is a lot of these whooshes are very short. So they just start like just before the shot starts. And then what I usually like to do is line up the peak of the whoosh with the peak of the movement in the frame. So say if you have, you know, 1 second shot where the peak of the shot is right in the middle of it. So say a car goes past and right in the middle of the shot is right at the peak of the movement. That's where I'll usually like to put the peak of the track. So you can see in this one here, I've got the car basically driving through the frame. You've got that cut into 3 different sections here. So 1, 2, 3. And what I've done is applied most of the sound effects from that whoosh into this middle shot here. So you can see as it builds up, the bulk of the sound effects happen right in the middle there, which is generally, you know, if you imagine what a car sounds like whooshing past you when you're just standing by the sidewalk or something, you're hearing it going from, you know, this side, the peak is here right as it's in front of you, and then it drops off as it goes past. Now, it sounds simple, but it's hard to get right, especially when you have a sequence of shots. But basically, you just try and get the peak of the audio at the peak of the movement. Now, moving on to track 3, this is where I include my risers. So this is essentially just, and I'll solo this track here to give you a better idea. This is when you want to build up into a drop off. So let's listen through this. Now, this is pretty simple. You can see that there's only a couple of risers in there. This is basically to create a sense of this kind of building intention, right? So especially after, it's most noticeable after this first shot here. So you can see there's this big build up into a drop off, and then the riser comes back in just there. And I've also timed it. I've keyframed a few highlights popping with the headlights there. So you can see that kind of flickers as the headlights kind of flicker. And then this last one here, you can see that I've also timed that to peak as this headlight flares on this side of the frame here. So one more time. There you go. So that is basically all of the risers added in now. So now we're gonna move on to the mechanics. Now this is the kind of like, you know, crunching, like rattling gear sounds to kind of balance out a lot of the whooshes. So this is really kind of like fast cutty stuff that, you know, you can pair up with gear changes in cars, like foots on the pedal, things like that. I actually find I use this cinematic mechanics pack for a lot of other stuff outside of just car stuff. These are really great for fast cut transitions, really of anything. It's good to have this kind of sound effects in there to just bring a little bit of energy back in. So let's run through this timeline as it is at the moment. So you can hear those kind of like crunching and rattling and ratcheting sound effects really kind of complement the whooshes very nicely. Now moving on to the next layer, which is car sound effects here. Essentially, this is exactly what it sounds like, all like kind of engine sounds, exhaust sounds, things like that to adding, you know, when there's those flybys or when the car is racing up to like the chase car, something like that. These are really good to kind of bring it back to what the edit actually is, which is, you know, a car commercial. So that's the mechanics. Let's move on to the last thing, which is basically any kind of like ambient sounds that I want in there or any other kind of cool sound effects that I think will complement it. So jumping into here, basically the last couple of things that I added in, one, this shot here, you can hear that little ping. Basically, it's like kind of like that glass shard sound effect. I basically just keyframed the highlights in this clip here up and then back down in this one, just to kind of add like the transition between those two clips when I had it there just didn't feel quite right, but just adding in something like this and adding in those highlights keyframed just kind of brought the two clips together a little bit nicer. Now the next one here, a very similar sound effect, but obviously just like a different tone, just to kind of help transition the two clips together. And then the last one is essentially just the rain sound effect on the windscreen. Now this clip actually had not a whole lot of other sound effects going on in there. And that was kind of what I wanted. I wanted to have those moments of quiet throughout the video. So you have all of these really fast whips and cuts and things like that, but then you break it right down to some of the really slow moments to make sure people are paying attention. So that's pretty much it for that. Let's run back through that timeline again one more time. So a couple of my favorite moments in this particular edit, one of them was this clip here of the wheel. Now this was just like using my GoPro just suction mounted to the side of the car. And I really like this riser sound effect here. This track is Risk Calculation from Lens Distortions. It's just another one of those really cool sound design clips. So I kind of wanted to match almost the sound that you would think of when you're looking at that wheel. You know, obviously you would hear it hitting the ground, like you would hear the engine, things like that, but that kind of spinning, like I wanted to find something that matched the spinning in that shot. And I think this sound effect was perfect for it. It was again, just like amplified by the fact that I've got that slow scale zoom right into the center of the wheel there. And then just that building riser combined with the spinning of the wheel. I think this was a really cool sound effect. And then another one, I also really like these moments of quiet in the video. So this clip here of this girl that I shot in Utah, it was just a cool clip to throw in because I really like the red of this. It matched really well to the red of the tail lights and the red of a couple of the other clips that I used in there. And I like that it just drops right down. You know, you have these hectic sound effects on both sides of that clip, but just for a short moment, it just drops down into just absolute silence. And then builds back up again as you go into the next transition section. So this was a really fun one to do. As I said, this is just my personal car. You know, I don't have any friends that own supercars or anything like that. So sometimes it's just good to practice with what you have. And that's exactly what I did here. Is the best way to get better at what you do is to just practice. And in this case, it was just using my own personal car for a bit of fun, and I think this turned out pretty cool. So let me know if you guys have any questions. Please drop them in the comments below, and make sure you jump onto cinematicsocial.co and enter your email address to get any updates on the course that is going to be coming Q1 this year. Stay tuned.